waiting for the drum roll. It just does something for you. Let me introduce Vince Ventimiglia and Robin Arnold Williams, partners at Levitt Partners, and we were going to have a bit of a discussion here about the landscape and horizon as we see it moving forward. So while we have you here, the landscape of healthcare has been perpetually uncertain. The Supreme Court, the legislature and Congress and others have begun to define and tell us areas where things are possible. But what I'd like to ask is, what, Vince, do you see from a federal perspective on the horizon as we begin to run out the next year and the next 16 or 18 months?
So divided government, I think, is what makes this environment so uncertain, difficult to predict. But I look out in the federal sphere to points of leverage where one side of government can have an impact, leverage the other side into more of an agreement type posture. This fall, we've got at least 4 points of leverage that the Republicans have in connection with the president. Chairman Ryan referenced at least one of those, reconciliation. Interestingly, these 4 items all come together to a head at essentially the same time this fall. Roughly the end of September, early October, we're going to see the availability of reconciliation as a tool. Chairman Ryan already referenced that. But in addition, funding for the federal government expires at the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. At roughly that time, September, October, the extraordinary measures that the president uses to continue to fund the government under the debt ceiling, his efforts, his ability to use those measures will end at roughly that time. September, October is the prediction. And we're going to see near term on the horizon the sequester kicking in another round of cuts for defense agencies, discretionary health agencies, and other discretionary agencies. So in a sense, 4 leverage points coming together in a head to create, I think, opportunity, risk for everybody, but opportunity for some collaboration at that point. And that's where Republicans will be able to go back to the president and say, those additional bills that you have signed historically, at least making modest changes to the ACA, we'd like to revisit some additional ideas for you. Chairman Ryan mentioned a couple of those. We can talk about others if that is of interest.
So, Vince, a comment too then on the election in terms of the implications that might be present for both leverage and opportunity and the like as that begins to unfold.
Well, as the chairman indicated, it informs their thinking. That's one way of saying it, right? The election certainly informs their approach and their thinking on this topic. Beyond that obvious fact, there is coordination between House and Senate leadership, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, with their presidential candidates that year. They're working together on messaging, legislative opportunities. Both parties are reluctant to expose their candidate to bad votes, bad issues, and so forth. So that's the ordinary situation. I think we're at, what, 30 or 35 senators running for a president next year. That's the unusual factor here that's going to make this even stranger. Now it's not just, you know, shall we coordinate with the president or our presidential candidate, yes or no. It is, I am the presidential candidate. I can coordinate myself, and especially in the Senate, every member has the right to go to the floor, offer amendments, filibuster, and make statements to no end. So it's a substantial factor in the environment going forward where you have this many members, senators, running for office and wanting to make statements about health care and spending more broadly.
Thanks. So, Robin, let's talk about what you see from a state perspective on the horizon as we move forward.
Great. So as I think about the discussions that are going to go on in governor's offices and legislative rooms and committee hearings going into the rest of this year and into 2016, I think about 3 themes that will be at play. One is the fact, and you've heard it mentioned a couple of times over the last couple of days, that Medicaid is now the largest single source of healthcare coverage, right? 70.1 million enrollees and counting. That's 12.3 million more than the fall of 2013. So those are discussions that are going to happen in budgets, right? In expansion states and non-expansion states, because the growth has been in all states with that. But adding to that, as a governor builds his or her fiscal year 17 budget this fall, is the fact if you're an expansion state, you now have to start paying some of the cost. It's no longer free. 5% beginning January of 2017, which will play into that state budget. So that's going to fundamentally reignite some debates and some discussions in both the governor's offices and legislatures in expansion states about now some of that price tag is coming due. Second thing is marketplace decisions, right? King v. Burwell released the pressure on having to revisit the decision to use the federal marketplace. But what you have seen already and will continue to see are sustainability discussions for those states that did the state-based marketplace. Financial sustainability affecting policy, affecting budget decisions. So how those will play out, will that push some more states to a state-supported marketplace model rather than a fully state-operated one? Yet to be seen, but those discussions will go on. And then third, a combination of all of those, as well as just overall financial pressures and governors and legislatures' desires to do things other than healthcare, like transportation and education, is going to be a continuing push, a discussion with your Medicaid agency director and your other public health systems to say, what are we doing differently? How are we disrupting the system? How are we transforming payment models and service delivery systems? So I think those discussions are going to go on. You're seeing that play out in states. It's only going to get magnitudes greater over the coming, I think, year or two with that. So
there are implications here as well for the elections upcoming. So comment on how you see that playing out.
Well, all of it, I'll reference back to Vince, all of it's happening at the same time as the federal politics and elections are playing out. So we have 2 governorships up this year. We have 11 up in 2016. So clearly those will be a part of the debates and the discussions there. But keep in mind that in most states, every member of the House of Representatives stands for election every couple of years, and at least typically half of the Senate does. So we often overlook those state legislative races that in fact can dramatically impact health policy and health financing in a state. I think one of the areas to expand or not, right? We still have about half the states, there are 20 states that have not expanded. Alaska did announce expansion yesterday. That's about it for what we think in terms of additional states expanding in this kind of rest of 2015, 2016 scenario, primarily because of the impact of the election cycles, both federal and state election cycles, and the fact that it's no longer free. That when you go in and ask for that expansion, you got to cover part of the cost of that. So I think those are some of the ways it'll play out at a state level.
Let me switch just a little bit to a remote section of the Affordable Care Act that is Section 1332. This section is sufficiently complex that my very cryptic definition will not adequately describe it, but in essence it says to the states that if they undertake on their own to propose a plan that covers the same number of lives, that provides the same benefits, that is affordable to beneficiaries, and that is deficit neutral, that they have an opportunity to begin to design a system that would be unique to the state. The states have over the course of time argued fairly regularly, let us do it our way. And it appears that 1332 waivers may be in fact a way for states to do it our way. What are the practical implications of this? How do you see that playing out? Is there anybody prepared and ready to deal with that, Robin?
So we're just starting to see real discussion about 1332 waivers in the states as they become fully available for implementation in 2017. A lot of the first buzz was around King v. Burwell, right? That if it went King way, then this could be a vehicle to preserve coverage and preserve subsidies in a state. That's kind of calmed down. We kind of see states taking a couple of paths, those that are talking about this early. One is you have some states that are saying, we've always wanted a single payer system in our state. This might be the way to get there, and looking at it kind of along that spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you have states who are saying, we really want to get rid of Obamacare. And one way we might be able to do it, at least within the confines of our state boundaries, is to pursue a 1332 waiver and totally revamp the system and brand it with name the state, X state's way of doing healthcare. So we're seeing those kind of options with that. I have to say we haven't seen a lot of movement yet. It is a heavy lift to put one of these together as currently constructed in the ACA and in the little bit of regs that have come out from the administration with respect to 1332 waivers. So I think while states may have some motivation to start down this path, once you take a look at it, it's a pretty heavy lift, and I think you're going to start to see very shortly, probably already, states pushing Congress to make it a little more state-friendly. So it truly can be something that a state designs for their state.
We ought probably to mention that this section doesn't become applicable until 2017. However, as you've indicated, there's a very heavy lift involved, and if states wanted to introduce something around that time or to present it, they would need to probably start almost immediately down that process, and the states will learn from each other as this process goes forward. Vince, from a federal perspective, maybe you could comment on 1332 waivers.
Well, so the state governors have been approaching the Hill already about this topic, and there are two big themes next year, certainly for Republicans, will be end the mandates and give states more flexibility, more control over their markets. That's the context for this 1332 waiver provision coming up in federal discussions. And it's not just Republicans, it's not just Congress. We are hearing now from parts of the agency and from both sides of the Hill that some additional changes, flexibility for states, and even new authorities or changes that would benefit the administration might actually be good paths forward. So I think, in fact, governors have been heard on the Hill. The administration is starting to talk in this regard, and it would push some key election themes for congressional Republicans.
Perfect. So we'll conclude this session and invite Governor Leavitt back up to the stage to talk about aha moments and implications. And thank you very much for the insights you've provided on federal and state.